My name is Perry, and welcome to the Literary Knitterary. Okay, so today I read books 5 and 6 of the Odyssey. In book 5, we begin with another Council of the Gods, which goes pretty similarly to the Council of the Gods in book 1. Basically, Athena expresses concern for Odysseus, and Zeus agrees to help him out a little bit. So he sends Hermes to go fetch Odysseus from Calypso's island, and sends Athena to go help Telemachus with the scheming suitors. After that, we finally get to meet Odysseus. We find him sitting, staring out to sea, and crying on Calypso's island because he's so sad that he hasn't been able to go home. Calypso doesn't really want to let him go. She kind of likes having him around, but Hermes tells her that it'll make Zeus angry if she doesn't let Odysseus go, so she helps Odysseus build a raft and gives him some food and some clothing and sends him on his merry way. Unfortunately, Poseidon is on his way home from Ethiopia and just happens to see Odysseus on his raft and gets super pissed off. So he summons the four winds and creates a giant storm that rips apart the raft that Odysseus just spent like 4 days building, so that's kind of rude. Odysseus sort of drifts around in the sea for a few days, but then finally manages to make land safely by swimming up into the mouth of a river, and then he falls asleep under 2 bushes. So he's had it pretty rough, and in book 6, it's time for Athena to try to help him again. So she goes to the princess of the Phaeacians, whose name is Nausicaa, and sends her a dream where one of her friends is basically like, Nausicaa, you have all this dirty laundry. What's gonna happen when you get married and all your laundry is dirty? That's no good. So she wakes up and she asks her parents if she can go do laundry, and they lend her a cart and a bunch of, slave women, and they all go out to the pools, the stream, to wash their clothing. And of course, they're right near where Odysseus was taking his nap. So they finish doing their laundry and they start playing ball, but Athena once again intervenes and causes them to drop the ball into the river, so all the girls start shouting, and that wakes Odysseus up. And there's a really awkward moment where he's like naked and caked in salt and like holding branches in front of himself to cover up, and he asks this young woman for help, but she agrees to help him and tells him to follow her back to the city and then wait until he thinks she's gotten home and then come in and sort of petition the queen for assistance, and that should work. That should convince her parents to help him. So there are a couple of things I want to talk about, but mostly today I think we're going to be talking about the translation again. First of all, it just kind of struck me again that this is a very pretty translation. When I started reading it back in book 1, I had this thought that like there are a lot of colors in this translation, and what I think I was sort of getting at with that idea was that like this is a very visual translation. It's very image heavy. So I think what I'm getting at is that the Wilson translation is more compact and more poetic. It goes through the same beats that the other 2 translations go through because they're all pulling from the same source text, but it goes through them somewhat more quickly and with somewhat less transitional material. I'm going to read a passage from the Wilson translation to try to illustrate what I mean. Like, it's just really, really pretty. There sat Calypso with her braided curls. Beside the hearth, a mighty fire was burning. The scent of citrus and of brittle pine suffused the island. Inside, she was singing and weaving with a shuttle made of gold. Her voice was beautiful. Around the cave, a luscious forest flourished, alder, poplar, and scented cypress. It was full of wings. Birds nested there, but hunted out at sea. The owls, the hawks, the gulls with gaping beaks. A ripe and verdant vine, hung thick with grapes, was stretched to coil around her cave. 4 springs spurted with sparkling water as they laced with crisscross currents intertwined together. The meadow softly bloomed with celery and violets. He gazed around in wonder and joy at sights to please even a god. Something about the way she writes is really like lucid and clear. It's like the ringing of a bell. It just cuts through everything else. It's sort of like when I was talking about the first line, tell me about a complicated man. It feels like it cuts right through everything, cuts through the distance intervening between the narrative and its contemporary readers, and just gets into the heart of things. So I'm fangirling a little. There are also just a couple of smaller choices that she makes, just little like one-line things that I think are really smart and clever, and that I think open up interesting conversations about the power and the possibilities of translation and of revisiting an ancient text. For example, right after that, she calls Hermes Mercurial Hermes, which is obviously kind of funny because the Roman equivalent of Hermes is Mercury, so in a way, she's just called him Hermes like Hermes, but she's able to do that because of the way that the idea of the figure of Hermes existed in Roman mythology and then in the Renaissance, in Renaissance era Latin, and then that Latin word came over into Middle English, and then it came to mean someone who was sort of temperamental or quick to change their mind. You have this word circling back to its own origin, which is just crazy, and is also an effect that could not be achieved in the original. For reference, in another interesting choice, the Lombardo has Quicksilver Hermes, Quicksilver being, you know, an equivalent term for Mercury, so he's also sort of playing the same game that Wilson is playing. Fagles just calls him a guide. Similarly, on the next page, while Calypso is yelling at Hermes for caring who she does or doesn't sleep with, Wilson describes Demeter as Demeter with the cornrows in her hair, which is again a super interesting choice with 2 layers of meaning. She has braids in her hair, literally, but she's also the goddess of agriculture, and so using the word cornrows has the connotation of rows of corn. For comparison, Lombardo doesn't mention braids specifically, he just says that Demeter followed her heart and unbound her hair, and Fagles calls her Demeter, the graceful one with lovely braids. So again, we have Wilson being willing to play with language, to pick up these newer words and use them to add a shade or shades of meaning, to say more than one thing with one word, which really serves her, I think, in creating a more compact and streamlined translation. Another thing I wanted to quickly talk about was that there's a little detail at the beginning of book 6 that I either didn't notice or have since forgotten the other times that I've read the Odyssey, and that is that the Phaeacians apparently used to be neighbors to the Cyclops, but because the Cyclops kept like marauding, raiding their lands and taking their stuff, they decided to move, which I just think is interesting if you take the view that this is sort of a catalog of different ways of structuring a society. You know, the way that the Phaeacians structure their society turned out to be incompatible with proximity to the Cyclops and the way that they structure their society. But yeah, I think that is it for what I want to talk about today. I will be back tomorrow with books 7 and 8. Let me know in the comments if you have read this translation and have any thoughts on it, or if you have certain books that you like to reread, or what you usually try to get out of a rereading experience. I would definitely be interested to know. Or if you don't have the energy for all of that, you can just leave me an emoji, maybe one that represents the book that you're currently reading. And if you like this video, I do hope you will consider subscribing, and I will see you again soon. But in the meantime, I hope that everyone is staying happy, healthy, and safe, and I hope that somewhere out there there's a great book waiting just for you. Bye!